All right, today's video, we are going to lift this Montero. It's currently sitting on 32-inch tires. It's riding on the bump stops. So we're gonna do a front and rear lift. I'm gonna go over the components we're gonna use. I'm gonna go through a step-by-step of how you can do this on your own. Pretty simple job. If you use parts places like Lusso Overland, he'll help you out. But we're gonna jump into this, see how much lift we get, and walk you guys through the process. All right, before we lift up the car, did some measurements over here from the edge of the rim to the edge of the fender, and we are at 9 inches over here, and we are at 10.5 inches in the front. And so we're actually raked, or we're squatted in the back about 1.5 inches. We're gonna get a lot more lift out of that when we put these springs in. So we're hoping that improves quite a bit. The front will probably go up just a touch, but those are our beginning measurements. We've got 9 inches and 10.5 in the front. All right, so now that we got the wheel off, we can see what we're working with. This is our upper control arm, and the way that I like to do these lift kits, we're gonna remove the upper control arm, and then we're gonna pull the strut out, and that should be all we need to remove. We're gonna have to also remove the brake lines so that this can kind of pivot out of the way. But this is a pretty easy way to do this so that you don't have to remove a ton of stuff. So these guys are gonna be 19s. They're usually on here pretty good, but we're gonna bust those loose, and then we'll go up top and loosen the strut tower. All right, so now that I got those two bolts out of the way, I can just move it over, detach the ABS sensor line and the brake line. Now you have full access to the strut. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go up top and undo the top hat bolts. Just like that, we have pulled the shock out, or the strut out. It's gonna be 14 millimeters at the top. You saw me remove the air box. That's how you get onto on this side. On the other side, you have to remove the battery. We'll show you that. So it's 14 millimeters, and then that's a 22 that goes through there. Now we're gonna figure out moving over all the parts that we need from this onto our new assembly so we can get it slapped back in and get this thing lifted. Also, while we're in here, check out this bushing. So this bushing is way sagged out. As you can see, it's just been pushed by the weight of the car up. And so even though we're putting a lift kit in there, we're actually gonna get a little more lift just by having a good bushing. So good reason to justify this as a maintenance item if you need to justify putting a lift kit in your car. All right, now we've got the old out and we're going in with the new. So I'm not gonna go over all the part numbers for everything we're doing here. We went to lusooverland.com and we got Lovell springs and Bilstein shocks. This is a good package, I think, for this. We got some medium duty springs on here. Part number is right there, CFR 90. These are the Lovells. These are ones that are going on the front. And then I like these Bilsteins. People kind of go back and forth on them. They're the 4600s, and what I like about them is they have this adjustable clip right here. And so what happens is, you can set this clip in kind of two different positions. You can set it here on the lower side, or you can move it 10 millimeters up, and it gives you somewhere between 3/4 to a full inch of lift. And so if you're looking for a little more lift, you don't have to change out your shock and spring package. You just have to move that circlip up and you can run it. So depending on your configuration, if you have really heavy duty springs, I don't think I would recommend running it that high. It's just too much preload. But that's what we're gonna go with. So we also got the bushing kit from Lusso Overland, and that's gonna be all the bushings that we need to put all of this old stuff onto here. So it includes stuff like the bottom spring and the top spring bushings, the bushings that go inside of here. That's gonna be those guys that are gonna go on top. And you do reuse the stock top hat. So it's something you can order from Lusso Overland. And if you get all of this, I think he'll assemble it for you, but he's got to have all of it in stock. So we're going to get a spring compressor, compress this, pull off that top hat, and then reassemble all of this with the new stuff and the old top hat. I'll show you guys how to line that up and then slap it in the car. So we got our spring compressor here, and when we're pulling this apart, this can be pretty dangerous, so be careful. I rented these from AutoZone. Super easy to rent and then return them. So I've got them set up here to go around these coil springs, and what you want to do is basically just relieve the pressure of this so that you can pull the end cap off right here, so that you can pull that nut off. That will allow you to release this, get the top hat off if you need to swap the top hat. Like I said, again, if you just get the top hat from Lusso Overland, he can just assemble it all for you. You don't have to do this. You can just chuck this part. But we're going to go ahead and compress that using the impact gun. Just going to run it down so we can pop the top hat off get it swapped over to the new part. All right, so now that we've got the top hat off, we're gonna reuse this. We're gonna keep all these nuts and bolts in order the way they came off the shock. That way that you assemble it the same way when you get it back together. So we're gonna get this guy out of here. We're not reusing the old spring or any of these old components because we've got all the new stuff, but we're gonna get this all off in order, swap over all the new bushings onto here or onto the new shock, put the top hat on, get it reassembled safely, and slap it in the car. All right, so now we've got the whole thing disassembled. We know the order, and all you're gonna do is you're gonna take the new bushings and you're gonna put them on the old stuff. So right here we have some grooves. Line that up with the strut top hat bolts so that the bolt ends just sit in there. Then you take this guy, which ends with 4/7. You take the grooves, and the grooves go up into the top hat. And then this one, this is gonna be your 4/6, is gonna go on top. Slide all of that down on top of here, and that's how it'll be assembled. So we're gonna get that spring compressed, throw it on here and hopefully not die, tighten down that nut, and then this will be ready to throw in here. And I'm gonna show you guys the actual orientation that you wanna put this top hat when we start to tighten it down. This is the other thing you can't forget when you're doing this. You gotta pull this guy out. It's the sleeve that goes around the top of that. That's gonna go off, and on the new part, you wanna slide it out. It's gonna center the bushing. It's also gonna set the height of the lock nut when you get it on there. So stick that guy on the new one. All right, so before we throw this in the vehicle, I want to talk about orientation. So the way that this bolts into the chassis, you're going to need this this flat spot, I guess, right here on the bottom of the strut. So the bolt's going to go through this way to line up. And the way you want to orient it is with one of these bolts perfectly in line with that. So one of these top hat bolts needs to be perfectly in line with the bottom so you can go straight up there and go through there. That's gonna make it so you can bolt it straight into the car once you reassemble it. Once you put the spring on it, you won't be able to turn that. So you've got to set that up before you release spring pressure to make sure that it's gonna fit. All right, so now we've got it set up. We've got the bottom one in the bottom, or the bottom side of the strut in the bottom position. We've got our new rubber here. We've got the coil spring. We have the top hat bushing kind of thing right here with the bushing, top hat, and we got the other bushing on the other side. So we're gonna compress this and we're gonna thread the nut on. You wanna compress this all the way before you put the nut on. The other thing is you wanna make sure that this bottom one, which can pivot, is lined up with the spring, and then you wanna get that orientation right so that it'll bolt up. So we're gonna go ahead and do that and hopefully not die. Okay, so now I've got this set up the way I want it. I've got this oriented so that it's gonna be right in the right spot. Now I've got this tightened down all the way. I'm gonna release the spring. Once you do that, you're pretty much set in stone, but you're also good to go. So I'm gonna do that now, and then we'll throw it in the car. All right, so that's how you get these out, is you pull that thing out and then you just twist them out. That's actually very easy. And we didn't even mar up the powder coating that bad.
Crushed it.
Okay, so if we did this correctly, this should just, Andrew, I'll need you to help me out with the top there probably.
You got it.
Yes, look at that.
Where'd you put the nuts?
That's a great question. The nuts are right here. Here's one nut. Whoa, this worked. Okay, here's another nut. So I'm gonna get those in there. Go ahead and just thread them on real loosely.
Yeah.
Got them?
Yeah.
Cool. So that's there. So now this is ready to jack up. So all we gotta do is put a jack underneath it, raise it up, slide the bolt through. Good to go. All right, so now we've got the jack underneath the lower control arm, and we're just gonna pump it up a little bit so that we can get this bolt back in, and should be super easy. Remember, it's the one that's gonna be 21 or 22. That's actually the wrong one. And it's got a little tab on this side where you wanna put this side, this bolt through so it doesn't turn on you. All right, so now we've got both sides done, looking good, installed there. Everything's tightened and torqued down over here. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna lower the car down onto its body weight, and then you're gonna tighten up these bolts. The reason you wanna do that is so that all of the weight of the vehicle is resting on this support. It's not being pulled up by these nuts. Technically, it's not super bad for it, but I like to do this so that you make sure you have your torque correct. So now we're gonna get the car up in the air, drop it down, reinstall this stuff, and move on to the rear. Okay, so now we've got the car flipped around, and boy, can you tell the difference. Okay, this is gonna settle a bit. Obviously, it's not gonna be this high all the time because we just drove it just around. And so that's way higher, that's super low. And so you can really see the difference if you back up here. So I know for a fact these springs are way sagged out. These heavy duty springs that we're gonna throw in are gonna give it a significant amount of lift, give it the appropriate stance it should have, and restore everything back so it's in good working order. So now we're gonna tackle the rear. The good thing is, now that we're done with the front, the rear is way easier. You're gonna have to just unbolt the control arms and change out the shocks, and it's really, really simple. The one thing that makes this more complicated is going and getting an alignment. If any of these bolts are seized, alignment's gonna be hard. I'm not gonna talk about that in this video. We're expecting to have to replace the rear camber and rear toe bolts, but we're not gonna talk about that. Instead, we'll just talk about doing the lift kit. So let's get this side jacked up and get into it. All right, now that we have the wheel off, this is all we're replacing on this. We're gonna replace the shock, which is as easy as getting this off and down there, as well as this spring. Now, I've already got a video on how to replace the rear shocks. I'll still go over it a little bit and show you guys how I do it, but if you want more details, I can show you how to do that. Take that off, and then we're gonna drop this spring out of here and replace it with our new heavy duty one. That's gonna require a little bit of leverage and lining things up. The key to that is you're gonna pull these two bolts. I pull this one first, this one's for the shock. Get the shock out of the way. Then we're gonna pull this one, and this control arm is gonna drop down, swing out of the way, load up the new spring, new pads, top and bottom, we'll show you those, and then get it all buttoned back up. So I'm gonna jack this up, and I'm gonna use that to put off, or get the leverage off of these, knock those out so I can drop this whole control arm out of the way and get to that shock, as well as get the spring out. Maybe. All right, now that we got those two out, get this all the way down, out of the way. That's gonna free up your spring. Just push this guy out of the way. Boom. There's your spring, there's your bottom pad, and your top pad is up here. So we're gonna be replacing all of that, but first we gotta get this shock out. Okay, so if you're having trouble getting this top nut off, that's a 17, and you might be able to get a tiny wrench on there. Another thing you can do is just put a pipe wrench on the metal sheathing right here, the metal protector, and sometimes that'll work. You just give it a twist, it'll pop off. That way the nut and the shaft turn separately. All right, now I'm gonna throw this shock in, one washer and rubber bushing on the bottom, one on the top. I'll line it up and send it through. All right, we just got this up in there. You put the rubber part on the top, then you put the spring in, rubber on the bottom. And then what I did is I held it in place while my friend jacked up the lower control arm so that I could get the shock in. Now, this knuckle is not where it needs to be. The easiest way I found to get this whole thing to move is to actually put a ratchet strap with the hook right there and ratchet strap it up forward somewhere solid on the frame, and that allows it to move forward. And then you drop this in with a little bit of finagling, you can get the bolt in. Then you should be good to go. Then you can tighten everything down and you'll have your spring stuck in there. Then you can tighten down the shock as well. So we're gonna get into that and hopefully it goes smoothly. All right, we very quickly abandoned the ratchet straps because we had two people. And so I just had my buddy push this forward, working the jack, and we got it in here, got the bolt started, and now we're good there. So it's bolted down here and here, which means the spring is good. Make sure to clock the spring correctly with that coil. And now we're gonna get this tightened down, and then we'll move on to the other side and we should be good to go. All right, now we've got everything on there. We're throwing the wheels back on, drop it on the ground, and we should be good to go for a test drive. All right, now we've got the Montero back on the ground, finally ready to take it for a shakedown run. Now, it's worth noting, right now we've just dropped it, and so there's still quite a bit of settling that it has to do, especially in the rear. It's gonna come down. So we're gonna go take it for a test drive, but now would be a great time to go back over all the bolts that you took out. If you have any of them loose, you'll usually hear a click, but if any of those come off, you're obviously gonna have a really bad time. So double check that everything's torqued, torque down the wheels, and then go take it for a test drive. On your test drive, you wanna be swaying it back and forth, hitting bumps, trying to get the suspension to actuate as much as you can to get it to settle. That way you can get your real measurements. And then once you're done with that, you can take it to an alignment shop and get this thing dialed in. So we're gonna take it on a test drive. All right, we are back from our test drive and this thing is wrapped up. Super excited with how this turned out. So we did the measurements front to rear, and right now we're sitting at 12.5 inches in the front and 12 in the rear. Now this is pretty loaded up with stuff right now, and so when we take that out, it's probably gonna level out, as well as I suspect the front will settle a little bit, and we still need to get it aligned. So this is awesome. We gained almost 3 inches of lift in the rear, so we're no longer riding on the bump stops, as well as we refreshed all of the suspension components. When we were in there, you might have seen we were doing some other things. We also did some bushings. We ended up having to cut out all of the alignment bolts in the rear, and we were just hoping that the front ones are good. So that added to the process. But other than that, pretty simple to do this job. These turned out really good. They look really good up here. I really love the Bilsteins, and the levels look pretty awesome. Very easy installation as far as the simplicity of it, getting to it. Nothing too weird going on here. It's super nice to have a buddy to help you out if you have one, to get these rear ones aligned, get everything in place. There you can see the new camber bolts. So anyways, you're probably gonna need to do a little bit of a shakedown run, and then I'd recommend getting this thing aligned ASAP. Hopefully your bolts aren't seized, otherwise you'll have to cut them out. I have another video on that. But then the car will be set up and ready to rock. So super excited to have this one done for summer. Looking proper now on the right wheel and tire with some lift. So hopefully this helped you guys out with getting a lift kit. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next one.